From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on enduring your next session with the acupuncturist when you suddenly have electrified nipples. And now, the podcast host who has no worries for such things because his chakras are always free of impurities, Pete Dominic!
Oh, yes, indeed. My chakras are crystal clear, my friend. No idea what that meant, but very happy to have you back. Thank you very much, sir. I have two excellent guests joining me on today's program. I've got Virginia Heffernan, who's one of the smartest people I know. Always love talking to her. Wired Magazine. We had a great conversation about Senator Hawley and masculinity, E. Jean Carroll, and her interview with the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. That begins at about 16 minutes in after the news. And the great Bill Boyle, Bill B. in D.C., always excellent. We talked about the debt ceiling. We talked about Tim Scott. And, of course, the latest from the war, Russia's invasion into Ukraine. And if you want to jump ahead to that, it begins at 1 hour, 2 minutes in with Bill. But first, what a news day yesterday. Let's get to the news segment, the first segment, which Susie Haveman wrote an email and said a whole bunch of things, but one of which said, "We continue to love your podcast. And since you asked the other day for feedback about the longer clips for extra content, yes, we love them. And I always love your opening segments. There's a routineness to them that's reliably comforting. I'll take it. Thank you very much, Susie. Always great to hear from you. And email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, well, what a day yesterday. Big news on the negotiations about the Colorado River. California, Arizona, and Nevada have finally agreed to reduce their water use from the Colorado River to help keep Lake Mead and Lake Powell from falling to critically low levels, which is a major story that probably won't get that much attention because so many other things happened yesterday. But the Colorado River supplies drinking water for 40 million Americans in 7 states, as well as part of Mexico, irrigates 5.5 million acres of farmland. The electricity generated by the dams and the river's two main reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, power millions of homes and businesses. So this deal to keep the Colorado River flowing for now is a huge, huge deal. It's only a temporary solution, expires the end of 2026, but I did want to mention it. I know a lot of you are affected by it, and it's a big story to follow up on and read in about. Other big stories, and I picked the ones that affect the most people. Nebraska governor signed a 12-week abortion ban and limits on gender-affirming care for minors, just another red state joining Gilead. Bad news from Nebraska, if you ask me. U.S. health regulators on Monday approved a new, easy-to-use version of medication to reverse overdoses caused by fentanyl and other opioids, driving the nation's drug crisis. The drug is called Opvee, similar to naloxone, a life-saving drug that has been used for decades to quickly counter overdoses of heroin, fentanyl, and prescription painkillers. Both work by blocking the effects of opioids in the brain, which can restore normal breathing and blood pressure in people who have recently overdosed. So I think that's pretty good news. And how about this? In a new survey, not quite 50% of Americans say they have no doubt about the existence of God. University of Chicago research organization said 34% of Americans never go to church, the highest figure ever recorded in 5 decades of surveys. And another report from our friends at the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, said that 27% of Americans claimed no religion in 2022, up from 19% in 2012 and 16% in 2006. The PRRI report tracks a historic decline in nation's Christian population, especially among white people, yet they still have a tremendous amount of power. How about that? President Biden and Kevin McCarthy continuing to negotiate over the debt limit. I haven't seen any news come out about that since I'm putting the show together tonight. E. Jean Carroll, weeks off her courtroom victory over Donald Trump, is again seeking very substantial damages after Trump again mocked her during a CNN town hall earlier in the month, and days after winning her sexual abuse and defamation case against the former president. She was awarded $5 million in damages after a Manhattan jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse, and now she's going for round 2, it would seem, which we're all rooting for. At least I am. And speaking of Donald Trump, before we get to the big news from Senator Tim Scott announcing that he's going to run for president, former White House lawyer of Donald Trump's, Ty Cobb, is predicting Donald Trump is going to go to jail. How about this? Here's MSNBC's Katie Phang talking to Neil Katyal, and they played a clip from CNN where Ty Cobb says this, and then they come back to MSNBC. I think I explained that. Here it is.
Last to you, former Trump lawyer Ty Cobb thinks Trump's going to be jailed over all of this. Take a listen.
All they really have to do is show that Trump moved these documents at various times when DOJ was either demanding them or actually present. I think this obstruction case is a tight case. And yes, I do think he'll go to jail on it.
I mean, Neil, Ty Cobb joining former Attorney General Bill Barr in this assessment, as well as former Trump fixer Michael Cohen. Now Parliamentary saying, peace out. I'm not going to be involved in any of this. It sounds like Trump's former lawyers know when to abandon ship.
I agree. It's never, Katie, a good sign when your legal team is falling apart before charges have even been filed. But I have to say things are looking particularly bad when one of your own former attorneys is predicting you're going to go to prison, which is exactly what happened here, and as well his former Attorney General Bill Barr. So I think that's a pretty telling sign. I do want to push back a little bit on what Hugo said, because I don't think that one of his attorneys resigning Parliamentary can be chalked up to personal differences. That strikes me as highly unlikely. I mean, lawyers are used to working with all sorts of different people with all sorts of different strategic judgments. You don't walk out on a case like this for something like that. So, I think really, Trump loses a lot of lawyers. I mean, the only thing he loses more than elections is his legal representation, and he loses them because they're either going to jail or indicted or worried that they will, or something pretty serious. And so I don't think that the explanation that's been given, and of course Hugo's right, that's what they're kind of trotting out, personal differences and stuff, is enough. And it may be that they're trying to set up this other lawyer, Epstein, to be the fall guy. Who knows? We'll see. Time will tell. But, so far things are looking very, very bad for Donald Trump.
Let's see how quickly Parliamentary gets his own lawyer, because MAGA really is making attorneys get attorneys, right? They all get lawyers for themselves when they're Trump lawyers.
Yeah, Katie Phang and Neil Katyal. That was pretty interesting. And that guy Boris Epstein, such a dick. He used to come on my show, and then I had to stop having him on. And he would keep begging me to come on the show. And like so many other people, he was just a backbencher, couldn't get much attention, totally unlikable. And then he got involved with Donald Trump and made it big. Ugh. Such a lowlife. Sorry to say it, but really, just a terrible guy. Oh, and speaking of terrible guys, and I'll be talking with Virginia Heffernan about Josh Hawley, Senator Hawley, later on. But Josh Hawley is the senator, one of the senators from Missouri, and a guy named Lucas Kuntz is running against him, released an attack ad against Senator Hawley, and he tapped into Missouri native actor, very famous actor, Jon Hamm's star power. Take aim at the Senate Republicans' attempts to portray himself as the champion of manhood. You got to see the video, but I pulled the 60 seconds of audio for you to hear. But definitely go check this out. Here's Jon Hamm making a campaign ad for Josh Hawley's opponent, Lucas Kuntz.
Manhood. You'd hope that means courage. Courage isn't something you can give speeches or write a book about. It's not sitting on the sidelines while others sacrifice, or denying help to those who did. It isn't putting people down or trying to control them, or using your own power for profit or ambition. In Missouri, you can't fake courage. We're the show-me state. Courage is something you have to show us. It shows in the working class people that pitch in to help the family next door bankrupted by medical bills. It shows in the Marine who signed up to honor and serve the community that took care of him. It shows when a Missourian stands up to the powerful, when he fights to rebuild his state, to empower people, to secure our future. If you want to be told about manhood, some guy wrote a book about it. But if you want someone to show you courage, send Lucas Kuntz to the Senate.
Well, there you go. Go watch it. And I thought that was pretty good. I wanted to share that with you. And now let's get to the big story yesterday, and only for one day will it be a big story. But Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina has announced that he's going to be running for president, or vice president, really, is what he's running for. He's never really criticized Donald Trump, hasn't really created any space between his policies and what Senator Scott believes. What does Senator Scott believe, by the way? Who knows? He's anti-woke. He's against the woke. Is that his deal? I don't know. But I thought this was hilarious that comedian J.L. Covan, friend of mine, friend of the show, with his hilarious Mitch McConnell impression on the day Tim Scott announced that he was running for president. Here is that.
So, today, my friend, colleague, Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina announced that he is running to be is running to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States. Now, Tim is a great friend of mine, and I've been an admirer of his for a long time. He's never critiqued me for posing in front of the Confederate flag, and though Tim has actually been the victim of racism, he never complains about it. In fact, what I admire most about him is he's never done anything about it. He turns the other cheek, like a good Christian. Those big, chubby, black cheeks. Whenever I'm around him, I feel like Mr. Drummond hanging out with Arnold. And I'll ask him to say, "What you talking about, Willis?" But then there is no Willis because I don't have any other black friends. So because of that, and because I hate Donald Trump with every fiber of my turtle shell, I endorse Tom Scott, Tim Scott, for President of the United States of America.
So good. Mr. Drummond. Oh, that was rich. And now here is Senator Tim Scott himself. He's polling in the low single digits, but hey, you know, he might still have a chance. Sure. The first caucus of primary is still more than 8 months away, so candidates looking to gain Trump, they have some time. But in his announcement speech, so Tim Scott doesn't even mention Trump or any of his other rivals, and he did kind of like scream in a weird kind of way. He said, North Charleston. Well, listen to this. This is how it opens. Real weird and awkward.
The man I am blessed to call Uncle Timmy, your United States Senator Tim Scott.
Hello, North Charleston!
Oh, dear. Yeah. So, there you go.
Thank you.
First black Republican elected to the Senate from the South since Reconstruction, and he doesn't think there's any racism in America. America's not a racist country, rather. I don't know if he ever said he doesn't think there is any. He just doesn't think America is a racist country, I suppose. That all depends on how you look at it. But there you go. That is the news for Monday, the 21st of May. But I've got more analysis from both my guests on some of those stories and a whole lot more coming up. But just a reminder, I cannot do this without your paid subscription. So many of you have subscribed over the years. You've been subscribers for over 3 years. Some of you pay a lot of money. Some of you pay as much as you can. You've raised your subscriptions up, and I just can't thank you enough. But we've got to try to keep those going, and I hate this part to ask you, but please sign up for a paid subscription. Go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you haven't, if you're new to the show, please join us at our Hangouts on the Discord channel. So many benefits being part of this community. You're never alone if you're part of our community. So many honest, amazing, kind, hilarious, generous, thoughtful people that are part of this community, making friends, building networks, and feeling like they aren't alone. So many of us are struggling in so many different ways, and we share those struggles with each other, helping solutions, showing love and support. So doing all that while we're learning about these important issues from our great guests, which we are going to do right now. So first, I've got the great Virginia Heffernan joining me, probably one of the smartest people I know, and got to know her pretty well over the years. She's a speaker, an author, a top-line futurist, a journalist, a critic. She wrote Magic and Lost, The Internet as Art. She's the former host of Trumpcast, which was a huge hit podcast. She's been called America's preeminent cultural critic, a public intellectual for the 21st century, and among the finest living writers of English prose. Is that good enough for you? Kevin Kelly, the co-founder of Wired, says that Virginia Heffernan is a new species of wizard. It's a joy and revelation to be under her spell, and I couldn't agree more with the great Kevin Kelly. She's got a new article in Wired magazine about Pete Buttigieg, who she interviewed and sat down with for almost an hour. She does mention a couple times our mutual friend Rommel, who is a genius. So just in case you don't know who she's talking about there. But we had a great conversation about Pete Buttigieg, about E. Jean Carroll, Senator Josh Hawley, masculinity, pornography, and more. I think you're really going to like it. I hope you'll tell her that you heard her here on the show. She's on Twitter at Page88. You can always find her using the links in today's show notes. Let's do it right now with the brilliant Virginia Heffernan.
There she is. Oh my goodness. She's back, and we're always very happy when she's able to join us. Hi, how are you? You're being attacked online. Are you okay?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm like trying to do self-care.
You've been here many times.
I'm not really trying to do self-care.
Hey, you're not.
I don't need self-care. No. I mean, I think that goes too far.
Fair enough. Well, first of all, I'm referring to the piece that you have in Wired magazine. I believe it's another cover story by Virginia Heffernan, and you sat down with Pete Buttigieg to talk about all kinds of things, which we'll get into. But some of the right picked it up, like Drudge or Fox. What was their interpretation that led to you being attacked viciously?
You know, it's funny because it's a pretty, I'm not sure it's a cover, by the way, although I did see that they made it look like it is. So that would be exciting. But yeah, it's out online. It's a Q&A with the Secretary of Transportation. I really had no idea. I mean, he's a really, really cerebral guy. And he set the tone, and it's a pretty high tone conversation. And I had no idea that it would stick in the craw of the right. I mean, I didn't even kind of go on Twitter yesterday. I was just working on something else. And then suddenly things started coming in, and it was, I think, Drudge, some people, right-wingers on Twitter got their teeth into it early. And then, and then it was just like it was just like the usual, like Drudge, Fox, either Newsmax or Newsbusters. Even Jezebel did something about it, which I didn't look at. I think anyway, everyone saw what they wanted to see in it. It was really fascinating. Semaphore, actually, the news editor for Semaphore, the Ben Smith joint, said, this is exactly the kind of piece I want to read more of, but I don't want to assign any of my reporters to write pieces like this. So I was pretty mystified about why it got in the heads of so many people.
I think it's because he's gay.
I mean, I think Occam's razor, Pete, honestly, I think you're right. Like, he is also, there's a little bit of a Hillary Clinton factor where just the level of merit is so far out of our reach that you have to just be like, I think he's an idiot. I mean, the guy is pretty much, he's got to be the smartest cabinet member we've ever had. I mean, I don't know what Thomas Jefferson was like, but seriously, the guy
have you never met Ray LaHood?
Wait, which one's Ray LaHood?
Well, my point is about Pete Buttigieg is you can't name another Secretary of Transportation from another administration because they usually don't have a high profile. I mean, obviously, if there's a terrible plane or train accident, they get more attention. But generally speaking, they don't draw a lot of attention in that job. Ray LaHood, I think, maybe he was commerce. It doesn't matter. That's my point. Yet somehow Pete Buttigieg is the subject of a lot of examination, and I wonder why.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you said that because he's gay, because I really was actually trying, because some of the far left also objects to him on the simple grounds that he worked at McKinsey, the management consulting firm. Yep. And they think that means, he's a traitor to the real left, which is something I actually asked about. A lot of our conversation was about neoliberalism and what he thought its fate was. There were a fair number of people who came out from the sort of ex-Chapo crowd to condemn the piece. And then the right was, is really, the right was just like crazy about him. And I think I think you're absolutely right. It's like with Hillary, and what I sort of feel from Buttigieg is like, I don't think anyone has ever hit his marks as well as he did. He's, let's just review it. He's from the industrial Midwest. He deeply understood his community in South Bend and exactly what happened when like Studebaker left and like, the kind of 20th century crisis when so many jobs were lost. He brought investment into South Bend. For what it's worth, valedictorian of his high school class, wrote a big piece about Bernie Sanders, admiring him, doing a profile in Courage for the Kennedy Center. As a child, was brought to the Kennedy Center for writing this piece about Bernie Sanders' heroism. Buttigieg's father was a famous leftist, Marxist. So he's got his, credentials in the left. Then he goes to Harvard, does extremely well there. Then he gets a Rhodes Scholarship and he gets, for what it's worth, a first in philosophy, politics, and economics, one of the most rigorous fields of study. Then he comes back, he works for McKinsey. Then he goes into the army and fights in Afghanistan. The guy can understands, and I think people thought that he might be a good Secretary of Defense, understands intelligence in the region, has some people object to him on the grounds that he's too hawkish. But it just, the level and somewhere along the way leads South Bend out of its, dire straits into a really, really flourishing economy. He's beloved there. He was reelected with 80% of the vote. Really understands conservatives, and then lost his DNC bid, lost his presidential bid, and then took this transportation job, even as you say, it's not a high profile job, and has managed to pull off 32,000 infrastructure projects. Like the headline that are now underway, not just the completed ones.
You link to there's an interactive page. You can see where they're all happening that they created, that transportation created.
I don't want to be too corny. Like you're, this is an ironic show, but just, for listeners, 32,000 is it is more likely than not, if you live in, any kind of municipality with a profile, that your municipality has an infrastructure project going on that the Secretary of Transportation has overseen. So take out of your mind what you think about Pete Buttigieg. If you, think he's too smart or too academic or too annoying in some way, and just look at those bridges and roads, because potholes don't have a politics. And it's amazing that the Inflation Reduction Act has, put this country infrastructure awash in money, and that we have someone who's been able to distribute it. And for the far left to tell us, or the sort of socialist left to tell us that this much government investment and this many infrastructure projects don't qualify him. The thing that he disqualifies him is that he's annoying to you. He once worked in corporate America. If you care about improving this country, you care about infrastructure. And so when you say immediately, he's gay, shorthand, that's why they don't like him. They certainly don't dislike him for his policies, because his policies have been amazing.
Well, I don't know if it's the left. They also, I guess there are some issues. I know a lot of smart black folks were critical of him because of some kind of a thing he did with police in South Bend, where there's very little diversity. But other than that, it's the only thing I think you didn't mention. But other than that, I guess you could call him a capitalist. I don't know. But the bottom line is the guy is clearly one of the most intelligent people. When I find out that he goes on Fox News, I immediately click on that. I want to watch it. When I find him in a debate, I want to watch it. So you having a conversation with him, I want to read it. And I did. And I wanted it to be longer. I wanted to have you ask more questions to Pete Buttigieg, because one of the most interesting issues is, as you mentioned, this guy is no feminine dude. He's not, whatever being gay means in terms of your masculinity. It's a preposterous notion at this point to really examine or care too much about. But but you asked him about this issue that we have in America and this obsession with masculinity, which I think is one of the most important issues in the country because it animates so much violence, first and foremost, and divisiveness. And he mentioned the woke Pentagon. As you mentioned, he was in the military. He's seen it all. But the bottom line is he's a gay man, married to a gay man who took leave when his son was when they adopted their kid. So like people focus on that. Tell me what he said about that. You write about it.
Yeah, I mean, he I think I said, like, tell me about masculinity. I mean, I didn't have, as typical with a cabinet level, official, I didn't have much. I had 50 minutes with him. And so I decided to spend it on, having read everything he's written, I decided to spend it on just asking for his responses to three major things. The first was neoliberalism. The second, as you say, was masculinity. And he said, I don't know where to begin. It was the same thing, that sort of like deep sigh that when we think about the masculinity, this sort of would-be masculinity crisis that Josh Hawley, say, is writing about right now. Yeah. The terrible anxiety about pornography, the whatever else. And he said, he thinks that this is a fear of displacement, a fear that like you'll have to, that men will sort of no longer be the breadwinner in the household. They have some idea. I mean, it's been a long time, right, since men were expected to like earn every dollar that came into the household and essentially own their kids. But somehow, somehow the Josh Hawleys or the Tucker Carlsons of the world believe that is like some kind of standing ideal that maybe they're falling short of. So moving from that, doing a little childcare, doing whatever, it's apparently so onerous philosophically to certain men that, and, parenthetically, not to get carried away, but like it is really crazy that it would be offensive somehow to have like a second income in the house. You actually don't see really masculinist or anti-feminist men really saying like, no wife of mine is going to bring $1 into the bottom line.
One of the weirdest, by the way, to go off on a further tangent, one thing I want to talk more about is, and I'm sure you have opinions on this, but one of the strangest phenomenons I'm experiencing personally, and so many of my listeners are, is in your 40s and 50s, if you have career setbacks, and one of them could be like, I demand this much money. I've been working in this job, in this industry for 20 years, and I want to get paid. And the company in the industry is like, no, we're going to pay someone younger who's going to work all day long, who's not going to demand time with their family. And so, no, the point being, a lot of us are in kind of a crisis with our careers and our finances. And we're like really happy if our partner was able to pick up the slack or take over, being the breadwinner. So we're not complaining for the most part about that. The complaint is when they can't necessarily. And I feel like I'm not able to meet, the needs of my family. It's a really horrible feeling. And there's a lot of guys that are going through that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that for men.
Yeah. I mean, this, that my husband, Richard, whom is, moved out of academia and now works mostly in construction. And he's much happier, right? Because as you get older, as you say, and younger people, and we're talking about people that in the, not long ago were at the top of their professions when they were our age.
Yeah.
And now, all of a sudden, because you want someone who works longer hours and for less money, we're getting sometimes pushed out. He's much happier. But, it does mean that, I think it's a crisis. It's a crisis. You know what it is? It's a practical crisis. It's not a crisis of some ideals of masculinity. It's just a crisis that's called consumer debt, right? It's a crisis that's called like, holy shit, I have to get another, I have to move off this credit card with its 25% usurious interest rate. Yeah. I don't know. You don't need to filter it all through, the history of masculinity or Judith Butler or anything. You just need to get those bills paid.
I think we do, though. But my point is, I think we filter it. Men, to your point about, losing, we're thinking I'm supposed to be, doing better. And my partner, my wife, if you're straight, is expected me to do better at this point. And don't undersell Richard. I mean, he's an artisan and a craftsman, not just a construction guy. I mean, but he's doing what he loves. And he only has one sweater. But listen, he loves what he's doing. So,
yes, exactly.
But going back to Buttigieg, I think the other issue along these lines, and this is fascinating, I bought my first EV, and I was the first person I know to have one in 2010. And that's when I started being called a pussy. I mean, the point being, he's the Secretary of Transportation. As the manufacturing industry starts to electrify cars, it is seen as somehow feminizing, right? He mentions this to some extent. I think that's part of it. He's the face. He's the guy. A gay guy is turning our cars electric. It's almost as simple as that. It certainly is for Hannity and the rest to basically make fun of them and say these cars are no good or they're not, whatever they say. What do you think about that? What does he say about that?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Pete, you may be like more qualified to talk about this. It's like the reverse of during Me Too, where you were like, I'll just listen. I mean, I feel like in some ways I just need to listen to my brother, my son, my husband about what masculinity might feel like and be that, or that the added story on top of the credit card bills is, well, I grew up thinking that I was supposed to do this all by myself, and it's impossible now. And how am I going to square that circle? I mean, I definitely get that. And there was a Liza Featherstone article, op-ed maybe a year ago about the masculinity crisis that did acknowledge that there is some cultural narrative that men are struggling with right now, because it is literally I just want to tell everyone, it is absolutely impossible to keep a household going with kids on one salary, unless you are, have hit it big in the stock market. Like they're you got to have another crazy income stream or you're like dying with consumer debt. That's my quick summary. As for the things that have been coded feminine, so electric vehicles and Impossible Burgers, he and I talk about. So these are the meat from plants burgers. Some idea that I don't even know how to untangle it. I mean, there are other things like avocados, like the work of John Maynard Keynes. Like there are things that get feminized that are it's like a complete mystery. Like we're not a gendered language, and yet you would think that it was like law Impossible Burger, law electricity. Somehow. So, but what's also interesting is that when I asked him, or I think he said, that Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that electric vehicles are emasculating. When I asked him about that, he didn't say, oh, gendering these things is ridiculous. He said the electric trucks have more torque than, V8 or whatever they are trucks, but, trucks with
combustion engines. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was really funny because it was like, no, they're more manly. Like, let's just like, I was just like, I don't have a car. I barely know what torque is. And I was just like, I think we might be out of my, idea of what things are coded what way. And I did think that, Buttigieg has some masculinity commitments that I didn't expect. He took the time to say that he likes beer. He likes, I think he said lifting weights. Yeah. And some other kind of manly things he does. And then he likes feminine things like taking care of his kids and playing piano. I just like, I don't know. Like, did people think that like Beethoven was unmanly because he played the piano? Like, what about, playing the guitar is manly? Like, I just feel like some of these things are really hocus pocus. Like they're like, and torque. I just thought that was so funny that he instantly said this electric.
Well, anybody knows if you're going to have a conversation about cars, and I'm no car expert, far from it, but the bottom line is torque similar to propulsion. When you press the gas, like they raced many times, they tested a Tesla versus the Corvette in a drag race. The Tesla always takes off a lot faster, meaning when you hit the gas, it's not gas, it's electric. An electric car, even mine, which doesn't have nearly the power of higher end electric cars, it's like a rocket ship. You jerk back. It's not the case nearly as similar with a combustion engine. So if that's what you're looking for, well, the electric car is faster off the mark. If that's more masculine, then fine. But you make a great point about us not having English not being a gendered language, and yet you could have added to the list military. The military has become somehow a culture war. And he talks about that. The woke Pentagon, I think, is the phrase that you use.
Yes. I mean, I think this conversation started because we talked a little bit about the woke Coke idea, or woke Bud Light, right. La Bud Light, La Coke. Some of the companies that have protested voter suppression in particular, or Disney, that seem too woke, too pro, like too open to what queer politics. I mean, who even knows at this point? And then also that the Pentagon, I think, refusing, say, to declare martial law, refusing to take orders from Trump, during Black Lives Matter, that these things might qualify it as somehow on the femme side of things is bananas. But I think also he says a really interesting thing. And I want to talk a little bit about, because I've been accused now of writing a hagiography of him, or sort of like a slaveringly in love profile. And that's not exactly true, but we'll come back to that in a second, I hope. He says this really, I think, really smart thing, which is, we're not talking really about the functionality of these things. And like, you'd think that a man, right? Like if men in some ways want to identify with like substance over style, right? They're not doing signaling. They're not doing like fancy posturing. It's not all about how you dress. You want the meat of something. Like, this is something Josh Hawley talks about with Teddy Roosevelt. You just want someone who gets shit done, right? Let's just pretend that that's an idea of masculinity. What he says is, when you talk about the Impossible Burger, when you talk about the electric cars, you really are not talking about functionality. You're talking about like this kind of cultural frippery that assigns gender to some products and not others, without allowing for the Tesla, off the blocks faster than the Corvette in those races, or the Impossible Burger being, like plenty delicious, especially like, Pete Buttigieg puts bacon on his. And so it just conversations about like marketing palaver, basically, like that are like, some things are feminine, some things are masculine, and you've always got to choose a lane. It's just too weird. It's also, why do we make problems for ourselves? I
have been it's been so antithetical. I think most of my adult life, as soon as I kind of immerse myself in the Upper West Side, entertainment and gay culture, really, I don't know. I always try to find things to like and admire about people. And I just thought it was so bizarre how me, a guy who loves women, has always loved women, would be considered somehow feminine or gay, I guess. And like, what are we even talking about? Look at yourself. Get back to Buttigieg and the hagiography point. You defend against that?
Yeah. So I think the National Review did even a parody of this piece on the grounds that it was too admiring of Pete Buttigieg. And I want to emphasize that he is the kind of guy that feels like he's using only a fraction of his intelligence to talk to a normal person. That he has, like, for better or for worse, that kind of intelligence that has, that could be very good at chess and piano and all the prodigy things, right? Like, think of them what you will, but like the Mensa skills, right? I actually do not find Mensa aspirational for everyone. It's a very particular dandruff club set of like interests that some people are into and some people aren't, like maybe our great friend Rommel, like people that want to like parse physics and want to think through. And he cites Puritan historiography, that at the same time they are really have that really deft left brain understanding of piano and all that stuff. And those people are fairly rare, the kind of prodigy types. I think that,
don't you think you're one of them? I think that about you.
No, I don't. I mean, I think there's a pretty hard line. My son might be, but I think there's a pretty hard line. The achievement in it's something like achievement in music, sports, or math, music, sports, math, or chess. before you're a certain age. I mean, just it's just a very, very particular, when you see it thing. Rommel has it. It's usually very left brain math, whatever. So he has all that. And you're not used to encountering that in a politician. But I also think that can be seen as a neutral quality, not like, it's just like acknowledging that someone's like also incredibly good at, baseball or something, like Ron DeSantis. I mean, some things you have to hand it to the person, right? Maybe they also are a doctor. There are people in politics that have other skills. He's, Buttigieg knows all these languages. So noting that he's like that kind of guy, I thought was really important for the reader. And I was walking away thinking from the Department of Transportation, thinking, what would I want to know about him? And then I thought, that he is someone who has these deep reserves of thoughts and intelligence that he's not going to be applying in any given moment. I associate with chess players is like, just to keep it simple, and so he just is seeing the world through many, many different, like a prism at all times. Yeah. Like maybe I don't know how those people think. Glenn Gould, like thinking about chess moves plus thinking about, pitch or sometimes synesthesia, having mixes of senses. I mean, I think in some ways it might even be burdensome to him.
I think that can be, I think I agree with that. I thought that about Stephen Colbert, who I worked with for a long time. I feel like he's one of the people that we're talking about here. And I've always felt inappropriate for me to, maybe to say, but like that it sometimes is burdensome to him as a result. Yeah.
He's got like huge passages of Joyce committed to memory. Yeah. Right. Like, right. So yeah, Stephen Colbert is a perfect example. It does historically go with depression, difficulties,
tragic things in their childhood, like he had losing their father. And like Colbert, I think sometimes that you're tortured if you have an amazing memory. It can be really torturous because you can remember all the bad stuff, all the pain, and never leaves. Let me ask you though, speaking of bad stuff and pain.
Very good point. Yeah. But so I wanted to convey that. Sorry, I just put a little button on it. Sure. I wanted to convey that. And yet, talking about someone's intelligence and even the particulars of it, if that's a big intelligence, can often just seem like pure admiration, as though I was just like staring at him like a Greek god, And I think for people who read deeper into the piece beyond the deck, you get a sense of like, ideally, a very, complex person where this outsized intelligence does determine his life. Stephen Colbert could be another comedian, right? There are lots of comedians, Eddie Murphy, I think of them, like that have just like galaxy minds, and you can tell, but they're not that particular kind of mind that like what you said Colbert has. So this is a lot of protesting too much, but I just wanted to make sure his idiosyncrasies came through. And
that's what you get, and that's what you get knocked for. But the truth is that person that you described, these people that we're talking about, can also have terrible intentions. They could be brilliant geniuses, but morally, bankrupt, even though they can quote maybe just about anybody. So I think it matters. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think Josh Hawley, I just finished his book Manhood.
Really, you read that book?
Well, for an article, don't worry.
I would think
and I went to the Stronger Men's Conference.
Virginia, wow! Oh, I'm so excited that you're on this. When do we get to hear about this? Go ahead, talk.
It's like, how Freud said, "What do women want?" is the major question. What do men want? Who are men? What are men, Pete? I've read every book by a man. I've met men. Still, total mystery. Like, you guys are thinking about torque and what that has to do with your penises. I still don't know what it
is. Oh, I can explain that.
You're like, that stuff's obvious. Anyway, I know. I'm sorry. I maybe missed the question there. But
no, I want to know.
Josh Hawley. I was just going to say, I think Josh Hawley is really bright. And I think some of these people, some of the elites, right, who are like the Tucker Carlsons, the Ted Cruz's, the J.D. Vance's, all the Yale, Harvard, far right elites who are very worried about masculinity also are so credentialed. I mean, I think one of the, like a probable an anxiety of Josh Hawley, who's like got very much metrosexual style himself, like just the hair gel, the thing is, he's Stanford, Yale, that they're also in some ways feel like they're burdened by their intelligence, especially when they're trying to connect with the everyman, when they're trying to like connect with like some of their constituents who are like sporty veterans, gun-toting, that like a Ted Cruz or a Josh Hawley is really, really having to master all kinds of details of the performance of gender, and also wrestling with the burden of intelligence. So, and they go in bad ideological directions. So yes, there's nothing about, a high IQ that is going to point you in the direction of some kind of valor. It could go with mental illness. It could go with bad ideology.
What is that? What is the conference that you went? What is the Strong Men? Is that what?
Stronger Men Conference. Oh. So it is in Ozark, Missouri, or Missouri, depending. It is supposedly in the Southwest, so that means Missouri. And it's held by the James River Church, which is a giant evangelical franchise of megachurches in the area, run by someone named John Lindell, who listeners may be interested, just pulled off an amazing faith healing where someone's toes regrew. Now, she had no toes and then the toes grew back. Now, sadly, we do not have photographic or any other evidence of it, but we're taking it on faith. It's an anti-yoga church. It considers Hinduism and any Eastern religion to be like the devil's spawn. At the same time, it has an annual conference on masculinity and manliness that was actually quite interesting. I went to it online. Rod and Todd Flanders?
Oh.
You do. The kids of Flanders in The Simpsons. The two, I want to pray. The two boys that are Rod and Todd. Well, anyway, there's a lot of grown-up Rods and Todds. And as you may know, Christian men are super into muscles now. So everyone's spending like so much time doing their Orange Theory or CrossFit or whatever, and just coming out like there's a masculinity crisis there. But anyway, so all those guys all got together, and then they pray. There's Christian rock. Can I do a line of Christian rock for you, a lyric?
I mean, I feel unsafe, but go ahead.
Okay. Hail, hail, Lion of Judah. Let the lion roar. I think I missed the rhythm at the end, and then they do they take like brooms and like stomp, because it's the brooms are their.
I mean, everything that you're saying signals not what I sense as masculinity traditionally. It all tells me you're a couple beers from a dick. Like I've always felt that way. I think it's always been the case. And I think a lot of women feel this way. I think a lot of gay men feel this way. Like when you're overcompensating, when you're trying to be so masculine, you're denying some part of yourself that might have a tendency towards homosexuality. I've always thought that. People they're so afraid that they could be gay. It's like they go through a looking glass and they come out the other side. I mean, when I hear this stuff, I'm always like, what are you doing? What are you afraid of? Why are you trying to be so masculine? And I've always, frankly, and I maybe I'll edit this out. I don't think I will. I've always thought that women would be more attracted to me if I was super comfortable with all sexuality, with any of it, because I would appear more confident. So if I wanted to attract women, I would be comfortable around gay men and not concerned and not afraid, and they would be attracted to that because that's how straight I am. I don't know. I've always felt that way, and I felt like I can sense at these kind of conferences, especially with a lot of the religious shit, it's like, yeesh, I think you're probably tortured about something, some tendency that you have of yourself, which...
Yeah. I mean, I mostly agree with you. And, and it's, I will say one of the main singers in that Lion of Judah song looks a lot like Elliot Page. And there were sort of incongruities like this, I played one of the speeches to sermons to Richard over and over and was just like, he codes as simply a gay man. I just would be like, oh, it's a night for gay comedy or something, just his particular style but anyway, but what do I know? Because I think when we get into the thing of accusing other people like it's some kind of secret terror of being gay, like even if we say they're repressing it, blah, 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 it like we get into weird territory. And the other thing that I find interesting is that everybody, including Josh Hawley in his book Manhood, including the Stronger Men Conference preachers, is correcting for toxic masculinity. So they also believe that other people are trying too hard to seem straight or to seem manly. And when it came down to it, there was a very simple, now there are other elements of theocracy that were on hand there, but I was actually surprised at how little Trump style machismo was going on there. It was way more family values. It was way more the pre-Trump, flame out of Jerry Falwell Jr., the former king of the evangelicals. These were not people advocating, three ways and paying off porn stars and raping people in Bergdorf Goodman. They were a lot talking about how you're not a real man when you think you are acting like a man and sleeping around or looking at a ton of porn, and that real men take care of their families, are respectful of their wives. And Josh Hawley told a story about how of a kind of sinning moment for him where he was fighting with his wife, who he pointed out, Erin Hawley, is a lawyer whom he met clerking for Justice Roberts. So like these are incredibly high achieving, thin air of achievements in the law, right? And then he met her and he thought she was brilliant and a better lawyer than he is. And he says that to the camera, like, I'm acknowledging that to her. He was having an argument with her. And he said he started wagging his finger at her in a kind of menacing way, I guess. And it did not exactly seem like the worst thing a person could do. I mean, he wasn't copping to like a very serious sin.
Right.
But anyway, he was wagging his finger and he said he saw his two little boys seeing him trying to win this argument, trying to just like be a dick and shake his finger, and had a crisis that he wasn't treating their mother with respect in front of him, and that in front of his children, he wasn't being, he says, a godly man, and that it had tilted into toxicity, what we might call toxicity, to like violence, to disrespect, to, arrogance, and that led him, in his framework, again, back to Jesus, back to an idea of his commitment to his family. And he says specifically, men who look at porn think that they're being manly. They're in fact not men at all. So this whole idea that like, I know what manliness is, right? That even we on the left say, oh, that guy's not really a man because he drives this car, and so he must be overcompensating. And this one who drives this must be secure in his masculinity, or this one who looks at porn is not manly. He could have had a laundry list of like what made Trump, Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too men. He could have done the exact same thing you could hear at like a anti-patriarchy conference, saying this isn't real masculinity. Like masculinity is about being a husband, which he talked about a lot. So, I kind of by the end was like, maybe masculine virtues, courage, respect, etc., are just virtues.
Exactly. Exactly. Right? What I'm thinking the whole time you're talking, at this point in 2023, I'm irritated by these ideas of masculinity, femininity, and the virtues that go with them. Because every time you assign any quality to a man or a woman, I always think, why is that assigned to me? I think of things as in terms of how you treat your wife or how your wife. I want a partner. I want an equal partner. I don't want to be, and yes, we fall into these gendered things, and that's problematic. But the way we should be thinking is like, I want someone who treats me like I want to be treated, and I want to fulfill my responsibilities. Exactly. If I end up doing the quote manly chores around the house, which is the case, like I do all the outside stuff and my wife does mostly the inside stuff. We don't think about it. We just know that if I don't get the lawn mowed or she doesn't do whatever vacuuming, like we're not upholding our partner, our responsibilities. That's it. And if she makes more money than me, awesome.
That's exactly what, to my surprise, Josh Hawley said. He said, I met her. It was almost like she was a sister or a friend to me. Like, we're pulling the plow together kind of thing. And, And not to mention, like, they're both these high-level lawyers. I think what was problematic about Hawley is that he is preaching something we might think of as toxic or Trump-like masculinity, or even kind of patriarchy, like my wife and children are my property, something like that. But more that he said, God has a plan for you men. God is reaching out to you, not political programs, not elected officials even, so it's sort of anti-democratic, but he has a plan for the individual that is you, and Jesus is in you. So it was a kind of rugged individualism crossed with like a very, very serious theocratic Christianity. So I don't want to say that there wasn't anything bad that Hawley said, but I didn't hear anything in what he said to suggest that we're not on the same page about what virtue should look like.
I think it's wild that you're being criticized for doing a hagiography of Pete Buttigieg when the truth is you're a huge Josh Hawley fan.
Fangirl, please.
Fangirl.
I know, Pete, I have the same problem you do. I like to like people, and I like to like people.
I appreciate that you're identifying that. That's very flattering. Before I let you go, I saw a picture of you, Dahlia Lithwick, and E. Jean Carroll, and I about burst because I am such a fanboy of Dahlia, who I know really well, and you, who I know really well. I've never met and don't know E. Jean Carroll. But could you just quickly, you've written about this, and then I'll let you go here, but like, tell me about your relationship with her and what you make of what she has accomplished.
I'm just a longtime reader of hers. So she wrote an advice column for Elle magazine. Speaking of gender, I loved those magazines to understand like normative femininity when I was growing up in New Hampshire. And I loved understanding that kind of stuff. And E. Jean modeled that. She just has this like fizzy, giddy, it came across on the stand, actually. She has this approach that's like, you deserve better. Let's go, have a cocktail. And, it seems a bit dated because, it's not millennial or Gen Z feminism, but it's, it's very bootstraps. It's very individualistic. It's very like, let's not spend a lot of time crying into our, scented candles, and let's put on our cool Dolce & Gabbana outfit and go out. And it was just lovely. Like, you came away from it thinking like, it sort of reaffirmed a person's like dignity to defy your boss and your bad boyfriend and your whatever, and just kind of go out in this independent way. Always loved that about her. Then I interviewed her with Dahlia on Dahlia's podcast Amicus, and during that conversation, she was unwilling to call what happened to her, even though Trump had pushed her head against a wall and put his penis in her body. Call it rape. She just, the same way that you might not call it assault if some guy hit you in a bar because you fought back and you wanted to say you should see the other guy. You weren't going to the police and saying like, oh, this guy assaulted me, right? E. Jean Carroll's very, very dignified. And she's a really serious longtime athlete. She was in her 50s and she managed to overpower Donald Trump, who's like twice her size, twice her weight. And she was super proud. And she said, I fought it off. So that's what she had said at the time. But I said, strip away to her in this conversation. And it was sort of a risk, strip away that it's you in the equation and that you want to like vindicate the fight that you put up. Say I'm writing to you and I say, Auntie E, because that's what people would call her in the column. Auntie E. This guy did this to me in this Bergdorf Goodman, everything, hit my head, did this thing. What would you say? And she said something like, you nailed me, Virginia. And she was like, I would call it rape. I'd say, you were raped, go to the police. And what seems clear is that people will, including men who are punched in a bar fight, sucker punched, and women who are raped, will do it for another person. You'll say, well, I don't want this guy to do this to someone else. Right? Like, you might do that with a bar fight. You might say, well, what if he hit someone who didn't fight back? Or what if he hit someone who, someone disabled, someone who couldn't handle it? Right? And we're more likely to be able to say, well, the next person might not handle it. And so when she said, I can do this on your behalf, right? I could tell you, go to the police for you. Then she started to think, maybe I need to do that for myself.
Wow.
And it was really beautiful on the stand to see her own for a person whose lifetime was built around being transgressive, being adventurous, having a high spirits, having fun, to suddenly have to say, you know what, this was kind of fucking traumatic to me too. And I never had sex again after this. And nobody deserves to like go into the dressing room and get raped. Like, it's just not a thing. And whether I said I fought back or not, it wedged itself in my mind, and that this was a crime. And the fact that the jury agreed and called it, said sexual abuse, said defamation, because he said whatever he said, was just incredibly moving, and especially moving to women in their 70s and 80s, like my mother, who, just never really thought you'd ever get, any kind of acknowledgement even of the suffering that you had been so on top of staying brave about. And now you kind of want someone to say to you, you know what, that fucking sucked. Like, that was so beyond the pale, and our laws should have protected you. So I was over the moon. And so was Dahlia. We were just texting and crying, and Eugene and I connected with Eugene on Instagram. Robbie Kaplan, Eugene's lawyer, who also litigated Charlottesville in a very clever way, is a total hero of our time. Dahlia writes about her in Lady Justice.
Knew that. We knew that when Dahlia wrote a chapter, I think, dedicated to her. And so when I saw that Eugene Carroll had hired her, I was like, that woman doesn't lose.
What Dahlia introduced them. And, the idea was this is a network of women kind of working together, and not losing. I mean, I love the idea that she was like, maybe I'll even sue him again for defamation after his town hall performance. But that's right. You're so right. You do not want to hear, hey, this is Robbie Kaplan calling.
They walked out of the courtroom holding hands.
Yeah.
Robbie Kaplan, Eugene Carroll. And I'm like, you never would have seen Tracopino and Trump doing that if they had won. Speaking, going back to our earlier, like there's this sisterhood that is so clearly strong and somewhat intimidating, I think, to anybody who might want to go up against it. There's this bond, and you can kind of, I don't know, to see you and Dahlia and Eugene, like I just was really inspired by that, because I hold you all in such high regard, and I didn't know that backstory. I'll go listen to that episode of Dahlia's podcast, and I really appreciate you and all of your work and talking to me. This was awesome. Thank you so much for all of it.
Thank you. It's like getting to hang out with you on these days. So good.
All right, we'll talk soon. I'm going to hit end on the recording, but don't go anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Virginia Heffernan. How about it? At Page 88 on Twitter. Go check her out. Go read that article. Go follow her on Substack. I didn't mention that earlier. All of that is in the show notes. So please go subscribe to her work and let her know you heard her here on the program, so she comes back, because she knows people are listening and appreciating her. All right. Speaking of which, let's get to my second guest. We love him. He is one of the smartest people I know. I mean, I know I already said that about Virginia Heffernan. I say that about all my guests because that's who joins me on the program, generally speaking. Really smart people. He started as a listener and then a caller, and now he's one of your favorite guests. He's a simple business owner in Washington, D.C., where he owns parking garages, but somehow he knows everybody and everything, and he never stops reading. He's a great friend of mine. He's a great family man. He's a great guy. If you're in D.C., look him up. It's time for Bill B. in D.C. We talked about the debt ceiling. We talked about Tim Scott. And, of course, we talked about the war in Ukraine and where that is at. It's always a great day when we get to talk with Bill. On Twitter at Bill B in D.C. Go follow him. Tell him you heard him here on the program. Let's do it.
There he is. Everybody loves when we get him on, and always love to talk with him. It's Bill Boyle. Bill B in D.C. How are you, my friend?
I'm quite good. How are you today?
I'm good. I have plenty of things I want to ask you about before we get to the war in Ukraine and where we're at and everything you obviously want to discuss, and been paying close attention to that. I just got to get your take on a couple of other things. Domestic politics, of course, the debt ceiling fight. What are your hot takes on this? There's been a lot of criticism that Biden and the Democrats, they didn't have a plan. They really didn't think that Republicans would take it this far. They should have gotten rid of the debt ceiling when they had control of both chambers of Congress. What are your thoughts on what's happening right now in the run-up to this potentially catastrophic situation?
The first thing is that the Democrats never had the votes to make this happen last year. Manchin and Sinema were always going to demand, and they did, demand that Republicans be part of any deal. So they never had the votes to get a Dem-friendly debt ceiling increase. So anyone telling you that doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, to put it quite bluntly. It is very much, as you know, I hate the sort of fucking West Wing sort of attitude about politics that, you know, if only everybody jawbones everything to death, someone's going to have a come to Jesus moment. Everything will be cool. That's bullshit. People have their interests. People have their political needs. Manchin is trying to run again in West Virginia. He couldn't be seen to be on that. Sinema is going to be, you know, an independent senator from Goldman Sachs if she possibly can. That's where she sees her future. So there was no deal to be made here. These people were not going to change unless Biden had done something so Republican friendly that he would have lost other Democrats. So in the end, that first thing is just complete bullshit. Now, on the idea of whether Biden's team had a plan, I think that what people don't do is they don't look at what's next ever, right? So when they say Biden didn't have a plan, you know, they say, 14th Amendment. Okay, 14th Amendment, it says that the federal government must, M-U-S-T, must honor its debts. But there's other language in there. We know that this Supreme Court is full of conservatives who will twist that language into a bow if they want to do it. So the Biden people were worried about the 14th Amendment not going through. People like Ezra Klein and other people were also worried about it. It wasn't just the Biden folks. They were worried that if they do the $1 trillion coin, right? It's obviously a gimmick, and it obviously is another thing that could have ended up in the Supreme Court, and you could lose. If you don't handle this correctly and carefully, you set off a bomb.
Oh yeah.
Even if you fix it 2 weeks later. So what the Biden people decided, and you can disagree with this or agree with it, but what they decided was the best possible deal is to get a deal with the House GOP, to force them into a deal, not just for now, and not just because it diffuses the bomb of the debt ceiling for a while, but because it makes it much easier to do a budget this year, right? This gets us through a lot of the budget negotiating that's going to come up. So we'll get through this. You may have another bomb that goes off later in the year. You're trying to run for your election next year, right? You want to try to defuse these bombs. Now, the GOP, House GOP, is doing better than they should. They're punching above their weight in this debate.
Yeah.
In part because the fucking press is letting them. Right? No one in the press, very few media are talking about this the way they should. CNN is awful on this. Obviously, Fox is. The bottom line is what the House GOP is doing is incredibly, incredibly irresponsible. And even they are beginning to blink. They're working on a deal right now where they're a lot closer than they were this morning. You know, now you're starting to see Jackie Heinrich, a few other people are literally leaking like, okay, here are the actual things now that are going to make this up. And they haven't even gone to permit reform, which is another big thing that they actually agree on.
What's permit reform?
Permitting reform is like it's a change national law to make it easier to build houses, to make it easier to develop things, et cetera. And I mean, pretty much everybody agrees it's a good thing, because if you're trying to build low-income housing, permitting really makes it difficult. If you're trying to build a factory, it makes it difficult. You know, it's a thing that kind of everybody agrees there's way too much recrudescence of law and regulation on this, and everyone would be happy to make it a better thing. It'd be better for everybody. It would, for instance, make it much easier to build solar farms, right? I mean, so it's a good thing for everybody. They haven't even brought that in yet, and I think that's going to be the cherry on top of this deal that makes it happen. And I do think, honestly, I think they're kind of close to getting it done. I did not think they were yesterday. But obviously, there were a lot of things going on in the background that suggest that McCarthy was being allowed to play a lot of kabuki. The White House was obviously kind of keeping its powder dry. And I think what this came down to is that in the end of the end, if McCarthy can't deliver the House, the White House is going to go to the 14th Amendment and say, fuck off, fine. Now everyone can see, now it's being reported that the White House is really making deals and offering them pretty good things from the Republicans' perspective. So what the Biden people are doing, everyone says they don't have a plan. That's stupid. to do the 14th Amendment, they have to show willing to negotiate. They offer to bend over backwards a little bit, and the Republicans still tell them to stick it up their ass. Then they can do the 14th Amendment, and then it becomes politically a conservative institution stopping our economy from operating.
Right.
The White House saying, okay, here's a solution. It's really straightforward. And then it gets handed to another conservative institution, the Supreme Court. And you put them in a position where it is really fucking hard for them to not go along. Right? Well, and so that's what's going on here. That's the sort of state of play, and the sort of people from the sidelines. Bruce Bartlett, I got to tell you, surprises me because I expect him to know better. But he has been kind of caviling from the sideline about this stuff. And it's like, sorry, guys, you're not.
What's Bruce Bartlett?
Really
what do you think Bartlett's got wrong?
Oh, he just always goes for like, oh, Democrats always screw this up. Democrats always give up too much. Democrats, blah, 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 blah. And he hates Republicans, obviously. Yeah. You know, I'll give him all the credit in the world on that. But it's just this idea that people who don't know, who haven't really tried to do these things, have never sort of negotiated these things, or, you know, as a business guy, I negotiate deals. I watch this as a business guy and I go, yeah, all this makes sense. You have to ease your way to these things. You don't get it by posturing and by going to the press and looking good. That's not how this works. And so, you know, although I will tell you, Bruce put up something really great, I should say, on the other side. I'm looking at
his tweets now, yeah.
Where he said that when you do this, you wreck the country's credit rating, or I should say you increase the risk on the country's treasury bills for the next X number of years, decade or so, which means that every single time now that the government spends money, if this happens, it's going to cost you and me more money to fund the federal government. And there's no recourse to that. There's no passing a law to change that. It's just who's willing to buy our debt and who's not. And if it's ever really seen to be in serious doubt, it'll hurt us. And by the way, Bruce also pointed out something interesting and good, which is that in 1979, a similar thing happened. And it hurt us for about 11 or 12 years.
Yeah.
So
he wrote this tweet, the real cost of Treasury default isn't that the economy will crash and unemployment rise. It's that interest rates on Treasury securities will be higher forever. This will cost taxpayers billions of dollars per year forever. And for nothing.
Yep.
And for nothing. Wow.
For Kevin McCarthy to keep his House seat or his speaker seat.
Right.
That's what this is about. So, you know, and this gets at just what absolute trash we have in the House right now running. I mean, McCarthy doesn't really control his caucus very well. He doesn't control the House really at all. And you have a bunch of bomb throwers. I hear as many as 30 on the Republican side who would be quite happy to see the country default.
Unbelievable.
30 people. Yeah, it's wild. And I'm hearing this, by the way, from Republicans. This is not a Democrat telling you that. So
the other big news today is that South Carolina senator, the only black Republican senator in the United States Senate, Tim Scott, has announced he's going to run for president. A lot of people say he's running for vice president. He's created no daylight between him and Trump, refuses to criticize Trump. He does have the endorsement of South Dakota Senator John Thune, which I think probably going to go a long ways. And during his opening announcement, his voice cracked kind of strangely. It made me very, very uncomfortable. What are your thoughts on Tim Scott's run for? Now you got Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, both from South Carolina, running for president.
Right. I mean, I never thought that in my lifetime I would see somebody run to be the first black Mike Pence, but that is apparently what's happening here. Right. I mean, you're running to be the pious asshole who sits there and, you know, hangs onto your breviary and talks about Jesus while Trump tries to shag the receptionist and tries to destroy the country. I mean, that's what these guys are. I've never had any profound dislike for Tim Scott. And I always thought he actually seemed like however much I hated his politics, he always seemed like a pretty upstanding guy. But very clearly, he is with enormous cynicism running to be Trump's VP.
I've just seen him
in the calculation.
I've just seen him as like a lot of other Republicans, just empty, just no principles, doesn't stand for anything. Right. As the modern day Republican Party doesn't really. I mean, he doesn't. So I can't respect somebody who stands for nothing.
Right. And obviously all of his bromides about his Christianity and his morality are obviously bullshit, because if you have any morality at all, Donald Trump is somebody that you cannot have any truck with. That's it. I say this as a, sort of buffet Catholic, right? Cafeteria Catholic. But I don't know anyone in my life, conservative or liberal, who would ever allow Trump into their front door, right? So, it's good to see that good old American cynicism is really lurking there under Tim Scott, and he is not the I don't know, how would I describe him, milk water Christian warrior that I thought he was.
All right, let's get to the topic that you pay so close attention to. We've been talking about for almost 15 months now. It's the Russian invasion and war in Ukraine, and a lot of developments happening. Of course, it seems like Russia has finally taken over the city of Bakhmut, although there is some disagreement or confusion there. But the point that I'm seeing that seems like the best point is that it looks like a Pyrrhic victory, meaning that for what? They have this city that's now destroyed, and they lost maybe 100,000 men and injured so many more. The city was once home to 80,000 people. Now it's mostly a pile of rubble, no electricity, water, or much else that could sustain an occupying force or serve as a base for launching further incursions into Ukrainian territory, according to the New York Times. Ukraine's military has fallen back to far more defensible lines on higher ground outside the city. We also have more developments in terms of more aid. The G7 just wrapped up. F-16s finally headed to Ukraine. What are your thoughts on where we're at today?
So I would describe the Battle of Bakhmut as the same as the Battle of Kursk in World War II, which is the Germans put together this enormous offensive, and they tried to kind of regain their momentum in the Eastern Front, I believe 1942. And they ran right into highly well-prepared and tipped-off Russian defenses that didn't quite win, but they gutted the German army's offensive capability. This is the same. And it's ironic that the Russians are doing this not very far from where Kursk happened. You would think, having done Kursk to somebody else, they would not walk into that same fault themselves. But they basically picked a city for its political significance, right? They wanted to get more of the Donetsk and get all of Luhansk and Donetsk. They want to get those provinces in their total entirety so that they can then say, okay, now the war's over. Right, we've gotten these full places, and we're going to draw the lines here, and that's it. But what they did was that they poured into it basically the entire mobilization, the last mobilization they did. They mobilized 250,000 men. Their losses from the previous round of fighting, 70, 80. They had to fill those in, so now you're down to 180. Now you just lost another 100,000 at least in Bakhmut. And then you've also been fighting everywhere else on a lower level the whole time. They basically just took that 250,000 men and threw 210 or 220,000 of them out the door. Right? So they really, they call it culminating. And culminating means your offensive has culminated. It has run out of steam. And that's where you are. And that's where the Russians are right now. 70,000 men for a city that's no bigger than the ward I live in Washington, D.C. Right? It has no strategic, you take Bakhmut, as you said, it's surrounded by higher ground. You aren't going anywhere once you get to Bakhmut. There was no next step, no operational, narrative to follow here where you get Bakhmut and then you get, the next city and the next and the next, and then you win. They just beat their heads against the wall. And what's interesting about it, and I say this to everybody all the time, we tend to look at this war that Russia's trying to win the war in Ukraine, right? But if you look at the reason for the war in the very beginning, why did Russia invade Ukraine? Bottom line was that Ukraine was turning into a democracy that was politically dangerous in Moscow.
Yeah.
Right? So they invaded Ukraine to try to snuff that democracy out. That failed. But at the beginning, the core, the kernel, is to keep power where it is now in Moscow. Well, if you look at Bakhmut now, why did they fight in Bakhmut? They fought in Bakhmut because during wars, ministries of defense get stronger. If you are the intelligence derived autocrat of a country with a big military in a war, you're going to worry that those generals who have all the guns are going to get tired of you. So just like Hitler set up the SS and the SA and the Volkssturm and etc., you create a parallel army that will defend you if your Ministry of Defense goes against you. That's what Wagner is. Wagner was founded in 2013. It was called the Slavonic Company. And it was founded in Hong Kong by two Russians who wanted to make money using all these Russian veterans to fight in Syria and everywhere else. Russia flipped out, dragged those guys home to Moscow, and threw them in jail. But then they took one of the senior guys from the Slavonic Company, put him under Putin's wing, and they started Wagner PMC. So what Putin literally went, "Ooh, that's a good idea." Boom, pulled these guys in. A year later, they were fighting in the Donbass to take it away in 2014 from Ukraine. This is basically Putin's private army. So when people talk about Prigozhin and all these things he's saying, criticizing leadership, he's not criticizing Putin. He's criticizing Gerasimov, Shoigu, etc. He is providing a counterbalance to the Ministry of Defense in Russia, right? And it lets Putin play the factions. He cuts off shells to them this week. He adds them next week. Prigozhin goes on TV and says that these guys can't win anywhere. Look at me winning in Bakhmut, right? So the theoretical framework should not be looking at this like, here's this military campaign that's happening. It's all political. War is communication, right? As Clausewitz said, war is politics by other means. In this case, it's all politics, except it's all Russian domestic politics. So this is factionalism in Moscow that is all designed to keep Putin in power. And that is why they're sitting and wasting 70,000 men in Bakhmut and probably screwing themselves in a couple of weeks when the Ukrainians go on their counteroffensive. But again, it makes sense in the logic of the people that are carrying it out. Because if they lose power in Moscow, who gives a shit if they don't, if they win or lose in Ukraine?
What about?
So that is my grand theory.
And what's next? I mean, if they're going to take and hold Bakhmut, what's next? I mean, isn't this just a war of attrition? Hasn't it always been a war of attrition on both sides?
No, not at all. It's been a war of attrition. The Russian methodology has been a war of attrition because Russia has a ton of artillery and they have greater resources and manpower. Occasionally they do. Potentially they do. So for the Russians, it's been all the stored fat of the military stored fat of the Soviet state. All these tanks, armored personnel carriers, all this crap that the Soviets built up until the 90s. Russia has this stuff sitting around and has just been burning it in Ukraine. So for them, attrition, you have tons of cheap equipment, use it, bury these guys in that equipment. Their problem is the Ukrainians are a much more intelligent enemy. And the Ukrainians have been getting really great precision equipment, really, really excellent tanks, et cetera, from the West. So while the Russians are going for attrition, the Ukrainians are going for maneuver and action. And you know, the old Sun Tzu line, like you fight where your enemy isn't, right? That's what the Ukrainians have been doing. And so what they did last year, they pressed on the Russians in the Kherson in the south. When the Russians rushed their reinforcements to the south, then they attacked them outside of Kharkiv and knocked them back 70, 80 miles, knocked them out of the Kharkiv Oblast. And then the Russians had to go all the way back around and try to defend that. And then they knocked them out of Kherson. It's a rope-a-dope. It's all about maneuver. It's all about using your interior lines, everything else. What's happening right now is that the Ukrainians have anywhere, you hear 9 battalions and you hear 16 and you hear 20 that they have kept out of the fighting and been training for the last 12 months. This is arming with Swedish and American and German tanks, armored personnel carriers, all the rest, training them how to fight the way we fight, the way Americans fight. For 12 months, these guys have all been training. If you have 20, say, I think they probably do have 20 battalions. These are spare guys who aren't doing anything right now. That's 80,000 men. What the Ukrainians are going to do again, and they're doing it right now, and you know they invaded Russia proper. Were you aware of that?
No. When? Where?
Today. They're about halfway to Belgorod, north of Kharkiv. So they went about 10 or 15 miles over the border into Russia, and have people fleeing en masse from this city near the Ukrainian border. It's basically a glorified raid, and it is driving the Russians absolutely apeshit. a Russian communications guy said that if the Ukrainians keep going, they'll nuke Belgorod to keep it from them. So the Russians so spooked, they're literally saying, "We'll nuke our own city, so you don't have it." Right? So this again is what the Ukrainians are doing again. This is far in the north. They're doing it in a way, the Ministry of Defense knows Ukraine is not going to drive on Moscow, right? But the embarrassment of having Ukrainian tanks roaming around a Russian city having a blast, right? And blotting out the Z's and putting like Ukrainian tridents up on the edges of a Russian city. That's incredibly, awfully embarrassing. And the Russians are going to have to rush reinforcements there to drive them back, right? You're seeing the same thing. They're going to rope-a-dope the Russians and get them moving. The Russian military has used a lot of its transport. It's used a lot of its artillery. Its training is total crap. What do you want to do if you're the fast, smaller guy in that situation? You want the big, lumbering oaf to start to have to move around. Make him move around as much as possible. Because the more he's marching back and forth, the more he's losing men on the side of the road, the more tires break down, the more tanks break down, etc. It's called shaping the battlefield. And that's what that's what Ukraine is doing right now. They are shaping the entire front. And, you look at it, if Ukraine's a fist, Russia's everything around that fist. You're in the interior of that fist, every distance is shorter for you, right? Anywhere in the front is closer to the Ukrainians than it is for the Russians, because the Russians have to go around the Ukrainians to get anywhere from the north to the south or the south to the north. So what we're seeing right now is that shaping period where they are shaping the battlefield. And when they find a rotten door, they'll kick it in. I have some strong feelings about where they're going to go. I think it's going to be somewhere in the south, and I don't think it's going to be like Desert Storm 2, but with a little luck, it might be.
Your friend Max Boot was in Ukraine. And he writes at the Washington Post, Ukrainians might not be able to pull it off, but they deserve a chance to try. As former defense minister told us, victory is the only option. After Putin seized Crimea and fomented an insurgency in eastern Ukraine in 2014, the Ukrainians tried negotiating an end to war in the Minsk process. The only result was to convince the tyrant in the Kremlin that he could expand his offensive with impunity. The best-informed Ukrainian officials are not fooling themselves that they can win the war this year. One senior military official told us that if the war were a soccer match, then we'd only be at the end of the first half. But those we talked to, from the most senior generals to the most junior soldiers, expressed a quiet confidence that a successful counteroffensive can set the stage for a final victory at some point in the not-too-distant future. Do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, what I think is happening right now, this war's a year and a half old, less than a year and a half old. We look at it like it's some interminable conflict. World War II is from soup to nuts, 9 years, right? So if we're at the stage where we're past the beginning, or we're not the beginning of the end, but we're at the end of the beginning, then we're years ahead of the speed with which World War II was fought. I think what would happen if Ukraine can get to the northern end of the Crimean Peninsula and they can get to Mariupol, in other words, clean out that corridor, I think the war for all intents and purposes is over at that point. That's not saying it won't go on. That's not saying it won't be a frozen conflict for 30 years. But as far as all the real fighting, as far as the real battle goes, I think that will be kind of it. And, there was a thing last week where people were freaking out about how the Biden administration is floating this idea. Like, what do we do if it's frozen conflict? What if we do if it's only slushy conflict? What do we do if it stays hot? How do we do all these things? And people in DC, of course, were like, these guys don't want to win. They never try to win, yada, yada, yada. They would be completely fucking remiss if they don't plan for each of those possibilities. That's their job. You have to think that way. The romantic thing is, yes, on to fucking Moscow. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And as long as the Russians want to continue to fight, this war's not going to end. And that's it. And so we really need to be realistic about what winning means. Winning means that Russia's not in a position to keep attacking Ukraine. That's it. There's no change of regime in Moscow. The border doesn't, we will end up giving Ukraine armaments for a very long time because it's good for us to do that, to maintain peace in Europe. And that's the way it's going to be. And you know, there's no clean ending. This is going to end like Korea. Much more likely that it's going to end like World War II.
What is your reaction to the news that the Kremlin has put sanctions on a whole bunch of Americans, from Rachel Maddow to Barack Obama to who else?
Two of my friends are on that list.
Two of your friends, of course. And apparently it's a similar list. The cop who killed Ashley Babbitt, it's a similar list to Trump's enemies, is what everybody's saying. What is your reaction to the sanctions against all these Americans who Donald Trump also seems to have a lot of problems with?
Right. Well, I will tell you that my first reaction when I saw that another one of my friends made it was profound fucking jealousy. I would put it on my business card if I somehow managed to get on the sanctions list. That'd be amazing. But it just confirms what everybody knows, right? Trump's enemies are Putin's enemies, and Putin's enemies are Trump's enemies. That's just the reality of it. And if you look at that list and that's not glaringly obvious to you, then you just don't really want to know. You're avoiding reality. Putin, the only way Putin comes out of this with even what he has now, however paltry and shitty that is, the only way he gets there is if Trump wins the White House in 2025. And I'm not even sure then Putin can survive. Right. Or Russia can survive in Ukraine.
Yeah. And Trump's most likely not going to win the White House.
So I saw a thing today that was really fascinating. It was a focus group somebody did, not fucking Frank Lunt's focus group. So it was actually legitimate. Mm-hmm. And they asked these folks, they said, what do you think about Biden? They were kind of like, too old, too this, too that. I don't know. And then they said, well, what do you think of Trump? And all but 3 of the people out of the 15 there were like, 100% no, I'll vote for anybody else. And one of them said, the way I feel about Trump is whatever the feeling that's worse than panic is. Right? I mean, Trump is toxic, absolutely awful. And I think in the end, Kamala Harris could beat him. Not crazy will win.
Not crazy will win.
That is the state of our republic at this point. Yes.
I like it. I like that. Not crazy. Yeah. Get a win every time. Really,
it's pretty thrilling, you know. It's pretty thrilling that that's where we've gone. But until Republican voters decide not to be completely fucking nuts, that's where we have to be.
Before we leave, did you want to say anything about Elon Musk's latest?
So Elon Musk just banned a guy named John Gans from Twitter. And John Gans, he was his handle was @Lionel_trolling, which is a hipster intellectual joke about Lionel trilling. I won't even bore you with. But John Gans writes tons and tons about the history and influence of pre-fascism and fascism in American politics, with a particular emphasis on guys like David Sachs, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, etc. Have you ever heard of boss cap ideology? It's John Gans it has this long explanation of the sort of how white supremacy worked in South Africa and how Thiel and Musk both came from that world, that milieu. And he got banned for the flimsiest of possible reasons from Twitter because basically Mr. Free Speech, Musk, can't handle somebody who just so precisely and surgically explains who he is and how absolute complete shit he is. That is my yet another example of Musk just showing his stripes in the most egregious and fantastic way. And by the way, David Sachs, who is Musk's hype man, is all over Twitter going, "They lost Bakhmut, awesome!" Like cheering on the Russians. I
saw that. I don't know who he is. Yeah. I saw those tweets. I think
he's just this ex tech journalist who got involved with all these guys as like a hype man and an investor, and he just needs to be thrown into a volcano. It's just the absolute.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, pal. All good stuff. I appreciate all of your insight on all of this. Always interesting to hear from you. The people wanted the Boyle. They got the Boyle. Thank you, sir.
Give the people what they want. Give them. Absolutely.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right, that is it. That's the show. News, Virginia Heffernan, and Bill Boyle. What a bang-up Tuesday program for you. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back tomorrow. I hope you'll tell your friends. I hope that you're doing okay. If you're not, reach out to somebody, if not me, because you are definitely not alone. Please sign up for a paid subscription or I won't be here anymore. StandUpWithPete.com or Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And I don't know who said this. I think it's attributed to Eminem, the rapper. But it's about the uncertainty. The truth is, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Life is a crazy ride and nothing is guaranteed. I like that. I live by that. Thanks, Eminem. Talk to you tomorrow, guys. John Carroll, take us out.
You better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.